What's cracking, big dogs? Welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Nick. As always, big dogs gotta eat fantasy football. Continuing and finishing up the NFC South team outlooks. It also wraps up the NFC conference as a whole. We are officially halfway through after this outlook is done. Wow, we made it. God damn, this took a lot of work to finish. So if you've enjoyed these team outlooks, they've been helpful, informative, whatever it may be, please just scroll down and give it a thumbs up. If this is your first one, well, welcome to the channel. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Also, I want to tell you guys something about, I found this app. I believe it's a year old. I don't know if any of you guys ever played in the MFL leagues, the My Fantasy League leagues. It's basically a best ball league where you draft your team in the preseason, like now, and you don't have to do anything to the team. It's a big roster. And each week, the app automatically optimizes your lineup, so it chooses the best players at each position, automatically starts them, and at the end of the year, whoever has the most points wins. MFL has been around for a while, but I just found this app called Play Draft, and it's the same concept, best ball leagues, except it's a pretty big upgrade in my opinion. So it's half-point PPR as opposed to full PPR. There are no kickers, there are no defenses. It's 30-second picks. So, you know, you could do the slow draft where it's like 8 hours in between picks and it takes like weeks to finish. Or you could do these really fast drafts where it's 30 seconds a pick and it's like that. You can do leagues for as little as $3. So if you want to just get in there and draft and you're doing it obviously against real competition because people are paying money, I would suggest downloading the app. It's really cool. I've already done like 3 or 4 drafts. I can't stop doing them. I'm like addicted. I reached out to them to try to get like a promo code or something to give to you guys. If I hear back from them, I'll obviously let you know in the next video. But you can actually follow people. So if you got, I ran into one of my subscribers last time I was doing a draft on there. We were in the same exact lobby. It's crazy. Shout out Great Bambino. But yeah, you can go follow me on there. My username is the same thing as my YouTube. It's just my name, nick.ercolano. There's no spaces on it though in the Play Draft username. But yeah, I would highly suggest you checking them out. Maybe I'll hop in a draft. So if one of you guys want to hit me up and be like, hey, let's do a draft together. I'm not really sure how it works on the app, but I would love to do it with you guys. So let me know. Put your username down there and I'll follow you guys. You can follow me. We'll make some shit out of it. But let's dive into the Carolina Panthers. Man, this NFC South is going to be a crazy division in terms of offenses. You got the Falcons, obviously, the Saints, Bucks, newly improved, and then the Panthers. We saw Cam obviously win the MVP, the MVP back in 2015. Took a pretty big step back last year, especially in terms of fantasy. So what I would say is he actually probably wasn't as bad as most people think. And the reason I say that is because his 2015 season was just so good. He was QB1 in fantasy like by a long shot, right? So people drafting him expected somewhat similar results. Wasn't the case, obviously. He was quarterback 15. He was QB 13 in fantasy points per game. So definitely not good by any measure, especially to where you drafted him. His pass attempts inside the 10-yard line dropped from 31 in 2015 down to 15. His rushing attempts inside the 5 dropped from 10 down to 6. So I would expect those to kind of rise back up to the norm. We'll see some positive regression there because he's always at 15 pass attempts inside the 10-yard line is like, I think he was ranked 26th in the NFL with that, and they should be a much more high-scoring offense. But I think a bigger story here is the shoulder injury that happened to him in week 14. Prior to that happening, Cam was a top 10 quarterback in fantasy on a points per game basis. After the injury happened, from there on, he was quarterback 22 in fantasy. He had a 5 to 6 touchdown to interception ratio. He had surgery on the shoulder this offseason. He's recovering from it. Reports say that he's feeling very good right now. It might hurt him a little bit because he needs time to develop chemistry, you know, with Curtis Samuel, Christian McCaffrey, these new weapons that he's going to have an offense with him. I'm not too worried about it. He should be full go by training camp. A top 10 quarterback on fantasy points per game is still not what you want out of Cam. You want top 5 numbers, which is what he had at the beginning of his career. I would say it's probably smart to expect him to finish somewhere between his 2015 numbers and his 2016 numbers. Right now, the fantasy community is probably pretty on point with where they're drafting him. He's going at quarterback 9, around 98th overall. Let me just confirm that because remember, I do write these blog posts way before I actually do the videos. So I do go back and usually edit them up right before I do the videos, but I just want to make sure I still have the most correct data. And if you're looking for a specific player, again, I'm doing all 32 teams, so if you're looking for a player, just go to my channel, type in the team, and within that outlook, the player will be covered. So Cam, yeah, 100 overalls, quarterback 9, so pretty much the exact same spot. which I actually think is a really good value there. I found him, I'm doing a lot of my play drafts, and I found myself waiting on a lot of quarterbacks. I don't pick any of the top quarterbacks, and I can get Cam in the 9th, 10th, 11th round, which I think is great value, because a healthy Cam Newton, a QB9 is a floor for him. But just consider the years that he's had. He's had multiple, 3, 4, I think, top 5 quarterback finishes, including the number 1 overall, obviously, 2 years ago. So you know the ceiling he can give you, absolutely. They do say they want to run him a lot less this season. I don't think they're talking about in terms of near the goal line, like within the 5, because those aren't the ones he takes killing on. You're not going to have a 2-yard run that kills Cam, but I think it might bring down his overall rushing ceiling a little bit. Maybe they're going to try to run him a little more, or run him a little less between the 20s. Overall, though, I really still like Cam's value. I don't think, he's a natural athlete. I think when the instincts takes over, he's not going to choose between not running and throwing the ball away. That's just the way he plays. All right, so we move on to Cam Newton's top weapon on the outside, Kelvin Benjamin. Reports, he came into training camp mini camp this offseason a little bit hefty. Not surprised. He's always had a problem with conditioning. It's been a problem injury-wise. It's been a problem for him stamina-wise. Reports say, Ron Rivera said he's in shape. He's been working hard. He looks a lot better than he did when he came into camp. Just good news, but it's not good news to see him coming into camp out of shape in the first place when it's his 3rd year, 4th year in the league. You should be over that kind of stuff, right? Like I said, it hurt his stamina. We saw last year, over the second half of the season, his receiving yards per game dropped by 25 yards a game. 2014, he had 142 targets, I believe. Tore his ACL, was out all of 2015, but his targets dipped to 112 last year. And they didn't have any other real weapons there, so there's no reason for his targets to have dipped that tremendously unless, his effectiveness is dipping. I think the addition of these new weapons, Curtis Samuel, Christian McCaffrey, should take away some targets. They're not the same targets that he would be getting. The ones Curtis Samuel are going to be getting are a lot of what Ted Ginn would have had last year, a lot of slot reception, so Christian McCaffrey and them are going to be behind the line and over the middle. That's not a lot of the operating work that Kelvin Benjamin does, so I don't think it kills him in that sense. What I would say is, where he's getting drafted right now, he's going around pick 75 as like wide receiver 33, 34. That has to be his floor. I think he gives you great value there, right? You don't have to depend on him as a wide receiver 2 like you've had to do the last couple of years. He's getting picked in the wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 range. He's going to be Carolina's top outside threat. He's going to be Carolina's top goal line, like red zone passing target on the outside at least. He's a big target. Remember, Cam throws a lot of fades to him. I think where he's getting picked, he finished last year as wide receiver 25, and last year was a bad year for him. He finished 2014 as wide receiver 15. So I think for him to be going at wide receiver 30, anywhere past 30, he's going to return good value there. So that's like in the 7th, 8th, 9th round when you're looking at a lot of those wide receivers that are on the board, or the running backs that have a lot of question marks near them. I think Kelvin Benjamin's actually a pretty safe play there and will return value to you if you get him anywhere past wide receiver 25. Then you go over to Devin Funchess. A lot of people, pegged him for a breakout last year. Didn't happen. He played in 15 games, had 371 receiving yards. Scored 4 times. I mean, the dude is huge, 6'4", 225. Benjamin is a better receiving option when it comes to those big targets, those red zone targets, those outside looks. Funchess was placed on the IR in December because of his knee. He should be back for 2017, but there's no fantasy value in Funchess, in my opinion. He would need an injury to Kelvin Benjamin in order for himself to be relevant in that offense. So when we look at the 3rd weapon on this team, once we move past Benjamin and Devin Funchess, they have Curtis Samuel. If you're unfamiliar with Curtis Samuel, he was their 2nd round pick. He's out of Ohio State. He's a baller. He's an absolute playmaker. Running back, you could put him out. Wide receiver, you could put him out. He was just like an all-around athlete kind of guy at Ohio State. Almost like a Percy Harvin, almost like, one of those type of players. Or Tavon Austin, just labeled as like a hybrid. 4.31 40-yard dash, 4.31 speed, so elite speed. He's likely to be shifted all over the field. We might see him in the backfield with McCaffrey or Stewart. We're probably going to see him a lot in the slot, maybe a little bit on the outside. He's going to be shifted around. He should carve out a pretty sizable role rookie year. We've seen guys like Ted Ginn with the explosive speed do pretty well in this offense. So it's not impossible to see Samuel score 5, 6 touchdowns this year. I do think he's going to be a better real-life player than he is fantasy player, almost like a Tyler Lockett for the Seahawks. Gives them that extra dynamic to their offense that confuses defenses and really mixes things up there. It's hard to imagine him going over 600 or 700 total yards and like 5 touchdowns-ish. So not great fantasy numbers. Like I said, I think he's going to bring a really nice dynamic to this offense. He's going undrafted right now. 191 overall, wide receiver, 59. I think he's a good late round flyer, you know, 15th, 16th round. As good as anyone that you're going to get at that point because he has upside. Definitely good in a best ball league. Someone in play draft, you could draft Curtis Samuel. That being said, though, I don't see much value in the redraft league and 10 to 12 team league. So then we move over to Greg Olsen. I think Greg Olsen probably provides the most value of any tight end this year in fantasy football. It was another routine year for him. Top 5 in targets, receptions, receiving yards for tight ends. It was kind of a roller coaster year for him though. As the team and the offense just didn't play well, his numbers really dipped of the second half of the year. So over the first 6 games, he averaged 6.5 catches for over 100 yards, like 102 yards. So like elite tight end numbers. They had their week 7 bye, came back, 4.1 receptions per game, 46.3 yards per game over the remainder of the season. So a ridiculous decrease in productivity. Here's what I'm thinking though. Olsen hasn't missed a game since 2007. And you're looking at the guys that are ahead of him. Kelsey hasn't missed a game in like 3 or 4 years, so he's fine. We have Gronk, you have Reed, both going 2 to 3, even 4 rounds earlier than Greg Olsen is this year. Both with big question marks in the injury category. Like I said, Olsen not missed a game since 2007. I will not question his consistency or his durability. He's always been a top performing fantasy tight end. He's always been on the field. So that's what you're getting out of Olsen. When you look back at his red zone usage, right? Like I said, Cam Newton's numbers inside the 10 dipped from 31 to 15 last year, right? Greg Olsen's numbers, he only had 5 targets inside the 10 last year, when the previous year he had 9. So he almost doubled that target number. As I expect Cam Newton's attempts down there to progress, I also expect Olsen's. So I do see a little bit of upside in the touchdown category. He's already a dynamite in terms of catches, receptions, and receiving yards. But if we see that touchdown total increase just a little bit, he goes from that tight end 4, 5, 6 discussion into the top 3 with no question, right? So he's currently the 4th tight end off the board, obviously, like I said, behind Gronk, Reed, Kelsey. He's going around pick 50, and I've been getting Greg Olsen in a ton of my play draft leagues in the 5th round. So I love getting him in the 5th round. He's someone that I think gives you the same floor as almost all these other guys that are going ahead of him, but you can get him for a round, 2 rounds, 3 rounds cheaper. So Olsen's probably one of my favorite tight ends this year to draft. So we move over to the running back situation, and this write-up right here, like just this little section on the running backs, took me a long time to do because I wanted to make sure I got all my research down, I got all the stats, analysis, because this is a very opinionated kind of backfield right now. We saw McCaffrey get picked and everyone went nuts. Everyone's like, McCaffrey, boom, that's it. Like, he is the guy there now, right? And everyone just wrote off Stewart. And now we're seeing a lot of the fantasy experts like get on this bandwagon of like, oh, I hate when fantasy experts do this shit. They just like think they're so like tricky and shit. And they're like, oh, Jonathan Stewart's such a good value now. Like, okay, I get it. Like, you swing the spectrums, and now we see Stewart's ADP coming back down because people are realizing the kind of role that's gonna play into this. Overall, I think McCaffrey will flirt with top 15 PPR numbers in fantasy this year. You know, he's a utility player. He can get 20 carries a game, or he can get 8, 9, 10 receptions a game. We saw that at Stanford. We saw him just be one of the best offensive players probably in the history of college football. And I don't think he's one of those players that flames out. Like, we see a ton of production in college, right? Of guys who put up thousands of yards, dozens of touchdowns, but don't translate into NFL. I don't think that's the problem with McCaffrey. I think he will translate fine. I think he'll be a stud in the NFL. But I don't think all the opportunity that a lot of people think is there is going to be there, especially in 2017. 13 to 15 touches a game is probably accurate, or probably a good estimate for what McCaffrey's going to see. So, you know, you don't take a running back in the top 10, or your first round pick, to let him sit behind like a 30-year-old Jonathan Stewart, right? My problem is where McCaffrey's going in fantasy drafts, right? He's going around like pick 33, 34, 35 as running back 14. And I feel like his ceiling is kind of baked into that ADP. There's almost no situation where I see him being a top 10 running back in fantasy this year. But like I said, I do think he flirts with top 15 numbers, which is very good, but you're picking him. But in my opinion, you're picking him where you think he's going to end up, or like where his kind of ceiling, or an educated ceiling, would be. Cam Newton and the Panthers involved their running backs in the past game less than any team in the NFL. He never throws to his running backs. The entire backfield totaled 44 receptions last year. 44. So there's 14 running backs that had just as many or more catches than the entire Carolina backfield. Mike Tolbert was the only running back on that team that even had a target inside the 10-yard line. And he had one. Just one. So, I mean, it's educated to assume that the number obviously rises. They're going to utilize this guy, McCaffrey, more than they would other running backs, right? They're going to specialize plays for him. They're going to make passing plays for him. So that number should increase with him there. But I've seen articles where people are like, he's a guaranteed 60 to 70 receptions. I'm like, that's fucking retarded considering the entire backfield had 44 catches on their own. So what if they double that number and McCaffrey takes every single reception, then you're right on your prediction. But that's very unlikely considering how that offense runs, right? Then you got to think about the touchdown ceiling. They have Jonathan Stewart there, who's not going away. He's 235 pounds. Much better goal line back than McCaffrey. Jonathan Stewart is really, really, really effective inside the 5. And they also obviously have Cam Newton there, who takes a ton of those rushes. So I think McCaffrey's touchdown ceiling is very limited there. So I was looking at some of the Vegas odds. They have McCaffrey's touchdown over-under total at 7. And I'm going to actually take the under. I would take a push on that. But if I had to choose one, I would go under just based on the fact that I think Stewart and Cam take almost all the rushing touchdowns. And like I said, Mike Tolbert was the only running back on the entire team that had a target inside the 10-yard line. And it was only one. So I think he doesn't really rack up the touchdowns. They have his total yards set at 1,000. For the over-under, I would take the over on that. Because I do think he'll get a nice mix of maybe 650 rushing yards, 600 rushing yards, and then like 400 to 500 receiving yards. I think he does break the 1,000-yard mark. But not by a crazy amount. I think he could flirt with top 15 numbers. When you look back at last year, you have Jordan Howard, Isaiah Crowell, and Spencer Ware were the only backs that finished in the top 15 PPR leagues that finished with 7 touchdowns or fewer. And all 3 of those guys had at least 1,250 total yards. So if McCaffrey's going to go under 7 touchdowns, which I think he will be, he's going to need 1,250, 1,300 total yards to crack that top 15, which I don't think is realistic. So I think he finishes between like RB14 and maybe RB18, but he's being drafted at RB14. So I'm probably not going to own a lot of McCaffrey where he's being picked right now, but I do think he's a dynamite player. So where does that leave Jonathan Stewart? Damn, when I started writing this, I was like, I really got to write this fucking piece. He didn't do well last year in terms of efficiency. He was good in fantasy because his touchdown total was very inflated, right? He had 9 touchdowns last year. But he only averaged 3.8 yards per carry, albeit he was behind Football Outsiders' 25th ranked offensive line for run blocking. So not a good line to run behind. 3.8 yards per carry, but it didn't stop Fozzie Whitaker and Cameron Artis-Payne from averaging, 4.4 yards per carry behind that same line. I mean, it was a very small sample size. It was only 93 rushing attempts. You know, at Big Dogs, we don't like to use analysis based on small sample sizes. So I would throw that out. I would just say Jonathan Stewart didn't perform very effectively. And he's 30 years old. Regardless, you're not choosing Stewart for his rushing yardage upside if you do choose him. Or that's not the reason that you would go against McCaffrey. Although Jonathan Stewart, I'll put this little image up on the screen, was tied for second most forced missed tackles on run plays in the NFL last year, which I was actually very surprised to see. Tied Le'Veon Bell with 47, only J.J. had more. He's still got a little movement to him. He's got a lot of power left in those legs, and that tells me that there's no doubt that he'll continue to be the goal line back there. He hasn't eclipsed 1,000 yards since 2009. It's not something he's going to do. He had 16 carries inside the opponent's 5-yard line last year, which was tied for 4th in the NFL. And he converted a ridiculous 9 of 16. So he was really, really, really effective in there. So what I would say is, that caps McCaffrey's upside a lot in terms of rushing touchdowns. 230, 240 pounds. He'll remain the goal line back along with Cam Newton there. Stewart's going to remain the early down back. First, second down. McCaffrey will take a few of those, but mainly we're going to see a lot of Stewart getting those early. He's going to start. He's going to be their starter there probably. And he should see 10 or so touches a game, 10 to 12 touches a game. Should be their goal line back. So he definitely returns value being picked at RB42, 132nd overall. So he's a guy you can get very late in your draft. If something were to happen to McCaffrey, and he takes over that backfield, Stewart becomes a pretty easy RB2, right? Plug and play RB2 like he was last year. I do think he's a better best ball league player, a guy that you could get in play draft because he'll have those games where he scores. He scored 2 touchdowns in 3 different games though. So he has that kind of upside on a week-to-week basis. And you have nothing to lose at that point in the draft. You're getting a guy who should see 150 to 180 carries. What else? They got rid of Mike Tolbert this offseason. They still have Fozzie Whitaker. They re-signed him. Whitaker is just like a pocket knife, jack of all trades kind of guy. He's not going to eat into anyone's workload. Cameron Artis-Payne. He was like a healthy scratch the entire half of last season, so fantasy irrelevant. And that, my friends, will wrap up the Panthers outlook. Done with the NFC. 16 more teams. Whew. A lot more info coming at you. Should be exciting. Make sure you scroll down and give it that thumbs up video if you enjoyed. You found it informational. Subscribe if you're new to the channel. Go follow us on Twitter. You can go subscribe to the blog. Go shop our BDGE gear. We got a lot of stuff on the website. A lot of cool stuff. Get swagged out. But as always, thank you for joining me. Thank you for taking your time to watch my face on your screen. Appreciate it. Big Dogs out.